Here are the headlines for our newscast tonight. On this Independence Movement Day, Koreans honor revolutionaries who gave their lives to lay the foundation for the Korea we know today. President Park reaches out to Pyongyang, reminding the regime the power to improve inter-Korean ties is in their hands. 5 a.m. Wednesday, Korea time, UNSC member states will vote on the toughest sanctions ever to be imposed on North Korea for its recent string of provocations. And South Korea's main opposition, Minjoo Party, announced plans to end its marathon filibuster. There would be disappointment over failed efforts to change a controversial anti-terror act, but some would find solace in knowing other pending bills would be passed. News Center begins now. Hello and welcome to this Independence Movement Day edition of News Center. I'm Daniel Choi. Today marks Korea's 97th Independence Movement Day, or 3.1. In her speech at a commemorative ceremony, President Park invited North Korea back for talks despite the hostile inter-Korean climate, but under one condition, that Pyongyang abandons its nuclear ambition. Song Ji-sun starts us off with the president's message.
President Park Geun-hye revived her vision for unification in her Independence Movement Day address on Tuesday, saying unifying the two Koreas is the way to continue the legacy of those who fought for independence 97 years ago.
우리가 통일을 염원하는 이유는 핵무기 없는 세상의 비전이 한반도에서 시작되고 우리가 누리고 있는 자유와 인권, 번영을 북한 동포들도 함께 나눌 수 있도록 하기 위해서입니다. 정부는 평화와 번영, 자유의 물결이 넘치는 새로운 한반도를 만들어 갈 것이며 그것이 바로 3.1운동 정신의 승화라고 굳게 믿고 있습니다.
After taking a stern stance on North Korea following its fourth nuclear test and long-range missile launch, President Park left the door open for dialogue, saying it's up to Pyongyang now, but that its pursuit of nuclear weapons will only bring about an end to the regime.
앞으로 우리 정부는 대화의 문을 닫지는 않을 것이지만 북한이 비핵화 의지를 보이지 않고 변화를 거부하는 한 우리와 국제사회의 압박은 계속될 것입니다. 정부는 앞으로 더욱 확고한 안보 태세와 국제 공조를 바탕으로 북한이 반드시 핵을 포기할 수밖에 없도록 만들어 갈 것입니다. 이제 선택은 북한의 몫입니다.
Referring to Seoul and Tokyo's settlement of the wartime sexual slavery issue, reached at the end of last year, President Park said Tokyo must sincerely fulfill its pledges to open a new chapter of bilateral relations, and that Japan must acknowledge history and its past wrongdoing. Pointing to her initiative for improving Korea's economic fundamentals, President Park says she will move forward with her major reform drives and emphasize that labor reform is the most important way to create more jobs for Korea's young people. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Almost a century ago, public demonstrations were held around the country as Korea demanded its independence from Japan's colonial rule. Kim Ji-yeon takes us to the various events held to honor the spirit of the revolutionaries.
The city of Seoul held a series of events on Tuesday to honor the 3.1운동, or March 1st movement. On one side of the city, families gathered at Seoul Prison History Hall to watch the performances held there. Members of a children's choir wore matching black skirts and white chogori, a traditional Korean garment, and sang a song commemorating the day. Pedestrians waved the Korean national flag and cheered in a reenactment of the demonstrations held 97 years ago, as the Republic of Korea demanded its independence from Japanese colonial rule.
I was impressed when I heard that the patriots read the Korean Declaration of Independence out loud, even though their lives were at risk.
Participants headed to booths where they could write a letter commemorating the 33 patriotic martyrs who gave their lives for the country. Across town, Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon and 12 descendants of independence patriots took turns ringing the Poisingak bell at a ceremony to honor the fallen. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
What inspired the Samil or the March 1st movement, and in what way is it significant not only to Korea but also to the rest of the world? Our Oh Soo-young takes a deeper look into Samil or Independence Movement Day.
모든 조선의 독립국인과 조선인의 자주민임을 선언하노라.
A public reading takes place in front of a crowd, echoing the words first proclaimed on the streets of Seoul 97 years ago. March 1st in Korea is a date that marks one of the first displays of public resistance against Japan's brutal colonization in the early 20th century. This became celebrated as the Samil Movement or the March 1st movement.
Korea was occupied by Japan in 1910, and over the decade, the level of oppression had become unbearable. Farmers had been driven from their homes as the Japanese had seized valuable land. And in the context of world history, it was an era of colonialism or imperialism. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson had called for an end to this era and encouraged nations' rights to self-determination. These factors sparked the movement on March 1st.
The March 1st movement began with 33 activists signing the Declaration of Independence at a small restaurant in central Seoul before turning themselves in to the Japanese police, choosing not to stir up a public riot. A crowd of thousands had been waiting for the leaders at a nearby park for a public reading of the declaration. After they failed to turn up, the waiting protesters went ahead with the demonstration, waving the Korean flag. And Chong Jae-yong, a scholar in his 30s, read out the declaration to the crowd. The protest that day sparked a series of similar movements across the country, and even abroad in China, Manchuria and the United States. Students, women, farmers and religious leaders, diverse social groups took to the streets in non-violent protest. However, Japanese forces responded with increased brutality, shooting demonstrators and even burning churches to the ground. In the 2 months following the March 1st movement, 7,500 Koreans lost their lives, an estimated 16,000 were injured, and 47,000 were arrested by Japanese authorities. The Seoul prison in central Seoul serves as a stark and chilling memorial to the thousands of activists that were held and tortured in their struggle for independence. Originally built to hold 500 prisoners, the cells were crammed with more than 3,000 inmates during the height of the freedom movements in March. They were subject to abysmal conditions, no heating, no toilets and barely any food. They suffered 10 hours of forced labour every day and various kinds of physical and psychological torture. Among them was Yoo Gun-sun, a female student who played a leading role in organising the March 1st movement, and her courage is remembered to this day. This is where Yoo Gun-sun was imprisoned. Even behind the bars, she cried out for Korea's independence, but this show of defiance cost her her life. In 1920, at just 17 years of age, she was tortured to death. The March 1st movement may not have resulted in immediate liberation, but it became the first significant step to Korean independence and even democracy, leading to the establishment of the Provisional Government of Korea in Shanghai in April 1919. Experts say it even inspired movements in other countries, becoming a symbol of civilized resistance to colonial oppression.
That effort, I think, inspired people, of course, in Korea, but across the world, most notably in China, leading up to the May 4th movement, which was very, very important in terms of China's development, but also in places like India, where it inspired the movement against colonialism and for independence, and around the world.
Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
To many young people these days, it probably feels like it's ancient history that Korea broke free from the shackles of Japan's colonial rule. On this March 1st Movement Day, it's a good time to check where Seoul-Tokyo relations are. Kwon So-hwa looks into whether the pain from Japan's wartime atrocities remain or if things are moving in a more positive direction.
They enjoy each other's culture, like to travel to each other's countries, and are major trade partners. On the other side, historic and territorial disputes have been straining their relations for decades. The Korea-Japan relationship is still struggling today, decades after Japan's colonial rule over South Korea and beyond Korea's liberation from the neighboring country. That includes Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women before and during World War II, as well as its attitude toward those crimes. On that front, hope for a breakthrough sprouted on December 28th last year.
It's been 2 months now since South Korea and Japan's landmark agreement on the so-called comfort women issue. But then why are demonstrations here in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul on that matter still being held every Wednesday?
For one, many Korean citizens and victims, of which only 44 are alive today, do not accept the deal, saying it lacks sincerity.
There needs to be an apology based on precise historical consciousness from Japan, not one of mere diplomatic expression. I feel there is a lot of ambiguity.
However, the government said numerous times a renegotiation is not possible, but that it'll do its best with the remaining tasks, such as ensuring the transfer of the promised compensation of roughly $8.9 million from Japan through a South Korean foundation.
The establishment of the foundation is an important part of the implementation of the deal. Working-level talks with the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family are in process.
But experts say that despite the achievements between the two governments, there is more work to be done.
We all know that we have attempted many things to normalize our relationship with Japan, but it has been pretty much limited on the government level. But the people-to-people level is not really good yet.
Along with the step-by-step improvements in the political and diplomatic arena, we should expand our bilateral projects to boost economic cooperation. And during that process, anti-Korea and anti-Japan sentiment could be reduced.
That may take some time, though, as Japan's sincerity about improving relations with Korea is being questioned. Even after the December 28th deal, Japan submitted a denial to the UN, saying there was no evidence that its military forcibly detained women, and continues to lay claim to Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island. Konsoa, Arirang News.
The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote on a new set of sanctions on North Korea Tuesday in New York. Despite a slight delay, according to our Park Ji-won, this fresh resolution drafted by the U.S. seems set to earn unanimous support from member states.
The 15 member states of the UN Security Council will cast their votes on the new sanctions resolution on North Korea at 3 p.m. in New York on Tuesday. This comes in response to Pyongyang's recent nuclear and missile tests. If more than 9 Security Council members vote in favor of the resolution with no opposition from any of Council's 5 permanent members like China and Russia, it will be adopted. A draft on the sanctions resolution was agreed upon by the U.S. and China and submitted late last month. Russia requested extra time to review the draft, but has reportedly given it the go-ahead. Now the sanctions resolution is expected to be adopted unanimously. This will mean Pyongyang will be slapped with a total arms embargo, a ban on sales of aviation and rocket fuel to North Korea will be put in place, as well as mandatory inspections of all cargo going into and out of North Korea. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, said the adoption of the resolution would send an unambiguous and unyielding message to the North Korean regime that the world will not accept its proliferation and there will be consequences for its actions. She also reiterated that the measures would be the strongest set of sanctions imposed by the Security Council in more than 2 decades. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
China's chief envoy to the six-party denuclearization talks says in order for UNSC resolution in Pyongyang to stick, Seoul and Beijing will need to cooperate closely. Woo Da-wei's latest remarks come after a meeting with South Korean Unification Minister Hong Yong-pyo on Tuesday. Hong agreed and said the reclusive regime needs to be further pressured so it moves closer to denuclearization. The two officials reportedly talked for more than an hour, exchanging views and covering issues related to the Korean peninsula. Since arriving in Seoul on Sunday, Woo has met with a number of South Korean officials, including Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and Seoul's top nuclear envoy Hwang Jun-guk. While the UNSC gears up to convene on North Korea, the possibility of more nuclear tests by Pyongyang suggests that a timely response to the communist state's provocations is of the essence. Lee Ji-won sheds light on new threats surfacing from up north.
Less than 2 months after North Korea conducted its fourth nuclear test, new data suggests the communist state may be preparing for another one. According to a report published by the state-run Korea Institute for Defense Analysis, movement at the North's Punggye-ri nuclear test site shows at least 3 more nuclear tests may be possible. The latest analysis by the think tank carries weight. It also foreshadowed North Korea's claimed H-bomb test 3 days before it was conducted in early January. According to data it gathered, tests on 2 fission bombs and a hydrogen bomb seem to be a possibility. This is because an underground mine in the southern area of the test site, as well as another freshly dug mine, seem to be undergoing preparations for potential future testing. The think tank points out that the mines look to go deep underground and have only one tunnel, which implies efforts to reduce the spread of radiation from a massive type of explosion. And if the North does carry out a 5th nuclear test, KIDA says its next move will not be a test, but an actual nuclear bomb. The report urged that talks or sanctions on North Korea must be worked out fully to also include the removal of a graphite moderated reactor in Yongbyon, which is the North's key means of producing tritium and plutonium. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Turning to the domestic political arena now, Korea's main opposition party said it's ending the filibuster aimed at blocking the passage of a controversial counterterrorism bill. An official announcement to stop the marathon speeches was supposed to be made earlier this morning, but was delayed due to an emergency meeting of opposition lawmakers. And that meeting continues at this hour. Shin Se-min brings us the latest from the stalled National Assembly.
The main opposition, Minjoo Party of Korea, said it would end its relay filibuster of a contested counterterrorism bill sometime on Tuesday. But just minutes before the press conference it had called to make the announcement, scheduled to start at 9 a.m., floor leader Lee Jong-gol postponed it, saying the party was going to hold an emergency general meeting of its lawmakers first. The filibuster has blocked voting on both the counterterrorism bill and a new electoral map that redraws districts ahead of a general election on April 13th. The Minjoo Party has been calling for a vote on the electoral map after striking an agreement with the ruling party on the new constituency map. But if the filibuster comes to an end, the counterterrorism bill will automatically come up for a vote. And in that case, the bill would most likely pass as the ruling Saenuri Party holds 157 seats in the 293-member parliament. Meanwhile, Saenuri Party floor leader Won Yu-chul said Tuesday the party, which wants to hold a vote on both bills for Wednesday morning, would not allow any more revisions to the counterterrorism bill. The Minjoo Party objects to the part of the bill that says it would give the National Intelligence Service more power to conduct surveillance on the public. The ruling Saenuri Party says the bill should pass as is to better protect the country amid the growing threats from North Korea and international terrorism. Whether the Minjoo Party will go ahead with the filibuster or end it and allow a vote remains to be seen. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Korea's exports have had their longest downward slide ever, and with the continuation of the global economic slowdown, experts aren't so optimistic there will be a turnaround anytime soon. Our Kim Min-ji brings us the discouraging digits.
It's another slump. According to the Trade Ministry, Korea's exports fell over 12% in January from the same month last year to $36.4 billion. That marks the 14th straight month of decline and the longest downward streak ever, replacing the previous record of 13 months from March 2001. The ministry attributed the fall to low global oil prices and slow global economic growth, especially in China. Exports of petroleum products and petrochemicals drove the decline, while falling export prices also pulled the figure down. But thanks to an uptick in shipments of mobile devices and computers, the February figure marks an improvement from the previous month, when exports fell over 18%, the biggest yearly drop in more than 6 years.
Among the outbound shipments that increased, exports of computers went up due to growing demand for PC exchanges, while wireless devices also rose thanks to the launch of new products.
Imports, on the other hand, slid nearly 15% on year to $29 billion in February, due mainly to a slump in shipments of raw materials and capital goods. As a result, last month's trade surplus amounted to $7.4 billion, extending the surplus streak for the 49th straight month. However, what's worrisome is that the surpluses have mainly been driven by a sharp decrease in imports, rather than an increase in exports.
The global economy is facing difficulty, and as these conditions linger, it's hard to say Korea's exports will make a major improvement.
The government has vowed to do all it can to boost the country's outbound shipments, but experts predict the downward trend will continue throughout the first half of the year. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
More discouraging numbers. Korea's per capita GDP last year is estimated to have decreased for the first time since global financial crisis. According to figures released by the Seoul-based Hyundai Research Institute on Tuesday, Korea's per capita GDP in 2015 stood at slightly over $27,200, a 2.6% drop from the previous year. It's the first decline since the year 2009, when Korea recorded a more than 10% on-year decrease. While countries like the US, China, and India posted an increase, Japan saw an on-year decrease, dropping over 10%. Citing figures from the IMF, the institute said over 70% of 186 countries posted an on-year decrease in their per capita GDP due to sluggish global economy and strong US dollars. Let's start with the race for the White House. Americans are voting in the highest stakes day yet for U.S. presidential candidates. Bruce Harrison joins me live in the studio with more. Bruce, it's called Super Tuesday for a good reason. A number of states vote for party nominees, and it may become one to go down in history books. On one side, Republican frontrunner who's been endorsed by the most famous racist group in America, and a Democratic challenger running on a largely socialist platform. So what are at stake today, on that day?
Sure, when you put it like that, Daniel, I mean, you do have the Ku Klux Klan endorsing frontrunner Donald Trump. That's significant. On the other side, this Democratic socialist, it's very divided on both sides. And, you know, the stakes, because the stakes are so high, that means voter turnout's probably going to be high as well. Super Tuesday gets a lot of attention anyways because the candidate who wins the most delegates has typically gone on to win the party nomination. Now, what makes this year so different is that much, if not most, of the Republican Party wants nothing to do with the man who's in firm shape to win the nomination, as mentioned. That's business tycoon Donald Trump. So his more mainstream Republican rivals are doing what they've been doing the most over the past week, and that's attacking Trump.
If we nominate him, let me just tell you, a vote for Donald Trump tomorrow is literally a vote for Hillary Clinton in November. And it cannot happen.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, running as a Democrat, also took aim at Trump, saying he and his supporters don't believe Trump's assertion climate change was created by the Chinese.
You see, and that really shocked me, because I thought that if Trump thought climate change was a hoax, he would have thought it was brought to us by the Mexicans or the Muslims, not the Chinese.
Super Tuesday gets a lot of attention because the candidate who wins the most delegates today typically goes on to win the party nomination. According to the polls, Trump led in most states, once again heading into Super Tuesday. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appears to be in good shape against Bernie Sanders. There is one major poll where Trump falls short the November election. The latest national poll shows both Clinton and Sanders would defeat Trump for the presidency in a one-on-one race. Thousands of migrants are massing at the border of Greece and Macedonia, and authorities there feared their numbers could become uncontrollable. Frustration boiled over Monday among the stranded migrants, and hundreds stormed the border, tearing down a metal gate. Macedonian police fired tear gas to disperse the crowds.
I think the people are angry, so we can't control them.
The situation was very bad, sir. We are here from 4 days. We had a swimming time last night. Our tent so wet, like our clothes. It was a very difficult night.
The numbers began to swell recently after Austria and countries along the Balkans' migration route tightened restrictions for crossing. Greece has been racing to set up temporary accommodations, but most are still suffering amid cold rains and muddy campsites. Many of the migrants are fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East and North Africa. They hope to reach countries such as Germany, which received 1.1 million asylum seekers last year.
Right, let's shift gears to some interesting news from the tech realm. The arch rival of Samsung, that's Apple, and they've been really standing their ground in tune with the spirit of Steve Jobs, rest his soul, and they're sticking with his guns, actually. It looks like that Tim Cook has been losing a lot of weight.
Yes, well, he's in a major privacy battle with the U.S. government right now, and they just won a big victory in New York. A federal judge in New York ruled that Apple does not have the authority to seize, or rather, to disable the security of an iPhone seized during a drug investigation. Now, this really fuels Apple's argument it doesn't have to help the Justice Department retrieve data off one of the phones of the shooters in the San Bernardino terror attack late last year, or help retrieve data in other cases. Now, before October, when Apple went to court over the drug case, it had always complied with the government's request, some 70 cases. But since then, it's reportedly denied the government's request for at least 12 devices. In the California shooting, the Justice Department argues obtaining the data on the shooter's phone is an issue of national security.
Right, the rebellious spirit of Apple seems to be catching on. We see a lot of people with interesting cell phone cases or stickers showing their support for Apple's move to stand firmly against government's pressure to crack under pressure. And they don't want to set a precedent for a security breach, not even by their own technical experts. And I believe this is an issue that's not just staying firm in the tech arena, but rather it's going to have some resonating effect or impact in the political arena as well.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, this has come up. I think what you're getting at is the Republican presidential campaign right now. A lot of candidates have spoken out in favor of the U.S. government, saying release the data. It's about national security. But what's interesting is whoever wins the nomination could ultimately have a hand in deciding cases like this, because the president plays a key role in the judicial system, appointing a Supreme Court justice and district court judges as well.
Well, I think a lot of people are expressing concerns about the powerful wave of support that Trump has been enjoying. And I guess some of the unfortunate developments for the Trump camp is good news, because clearly there are many seasoned experts who are concerned that Trump is a great person for campaigning and champagning, but not exactly the person you might want to rely on when you need to consult diplomatic efforts with various other countries around the world, and especially when you're such a big mover and shaker in this global community called the United States.
I know regarding this issue, he's going to appoint a conservative justice if he gets the presidency, Daniel.
That's definitely one of the many changes that Trump will implement. Well, thank you for those stories today, Bruce.
My pleasure.
And now the weather. It was a freezing start to the first day of March. For more, let's turn to our weather center with our Lee Ji-yeon standing by to check on the conditions that might be in store for us. Ji-yeon?
Hello, Daniel. It is cold season, and today's chilly weather was no help. It seems like a lot of people are coming down with the flu and cold, but one thing I do notice that you do sound better today.
Well, thank you for that, Ji-yeon. Some people might miss my phlegm voice, but I like my voice the way it is, the way it used to be, actually. Well, I've been drinking lots of water, washing my hands frequently, and eating well. The simple tips that you provide as a seasonal dues during our newscast, you've reminded us to follow. So thanks for that.
Yes, good advice to follow. Now, March kicked off with a cold snap, but from tomorrow we'll feel a gradual warm-up just in time for the new school year here in Korea. Early spring conditions should set in with the daily highs getting up to 9 degrees Celsius here in the capital. And we're looking at a lot of sun for tomorrow with clear skies down south, and air quality will be at a normal level throughout the day tomorrow. So definitely have some pleasant weather in the forecast for tomorrow. But lows will kick off below freezing mark, as the low will start out at -2 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, Daegu and Gwangju, while Busan and Jeju will start out at 1 and 3 degrees Celsius respectively. But by the time you head out for lunch, it's going to be quite mild outside, with a daily high peaking to 9 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, 12 for Daegu, Gwangju, and Busan, while Jeju should see a high of 13. Now, it's going to get warmer and warmer each day this week, and by Friday, we'll see the local mercury getting up to 15 degrees Celsius, but we do have rain in the forecast on Saturday. Now, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
More than just a day off for Koreans, a day to remember the sacrifices made by various patriots to ensure we have the freedom we have today, and to remind ourselves that freedom is never free. And that brings us to the end of this edition of News Center. Thank you so much for staying with us.